All right, let's go ahead and get started. We're about 2 minutes past the hour. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Dr. Rob Gropp, and he's going to go ahead and do some introductions. Rob?
Thank you, Diane. So welcome, everyone. My name is Robert Gropp, and as Diane mentioned, or may have mentioned, I am one of the co-executive directors of the American Institute of Biological Sciences. We are a national membership organization and the only national science organization dedicated to promoting informed decision-making that advances biology for the benefit of science and society. And I wanted to take a brief moment just to, first of all, thank everyone for joining us today and to tell a little bit more about a number of our programs, the careers programs being one of them. We achieve our mission through a number of initiatives that we undertake both individually and in partnership with our members or business partners. And so that includes everything from providing peer review and scientific support services to foundations or government contract or government clients, private industry, to the publication of scientific journals and sharing vetted information, to science policy and communication programs and professional development training initiatives. One of the things we've learned among all these programs is that there's a desperate need by a number of individuals and biologists for access to quality information that helps them both advance their career but also interact with decision makers, policy makers, or other professionals. And so the last couple of years we've launched a number of online programs that we branded either leadership in biology webinars that talk about current topics in science and where it interfaces with the public interest, and also these career in biology webinars. And we view these as an opportunity to try to bring together leaders in their fields to share insights and information with the next generation or individuals who are interested in learning about possible operations in their career path or trajectory. So with that, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I particularly want to thank our panelists, and I think this is going to be an exciting program and very informative from what I've heard from so far. So I'm going to turn it back over to Diane Bozajak, who's the AIBS membership manager, to provide you all with a few housekeeping insights, and then we'll go ahead and get right into the program. But once again, thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. All right, this is just a quick little reminder. This meeting is being recorded for archival purposes. If you have any questions or issues, please use the chat feature below and someone from AIBS will assist you. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the call. To ask a question, use the Q&A feature. You'll see on the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Just tap on that and type in your question, and I will then relay the question to the presenters. Again, I would like to thank everybody for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Rhiann Muir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rhiann Muir. I am a biologist and a patent attorney, and I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today. So you will hear over the next hour that there are some really different, really interesting, and really exciting opportunities for scientists and biologists who are interested in pursuing a career in the legal and policy spaces. And today during the webinar, we'll start with hearing about the speaker's background and what their job entails. I then have some questions for the panelists, and then we'll wrap up the hour by turning to some questions from you all that will, I think, will give people a great opportunity to get input and career advice from this really accomplished group of people that we have on the panel. So let's start with some introductions. Jeff, could you kick us off here? Could you introduce yourself, describe your current position and your background?
Sure, happy to. Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to participate in this panel. And so I'm the CEO of a company called Good Start Genetics. We're a private company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We have operations in 50 states. And we primarily service the fertility market by providing genetic testing for couples who are trying to conceive, and we look at genetic compatibility of those couples. We also do genetic screening of embryos prior to implantation to help ensure successful pregnancies. Part of my job is obviously overseeing the operation, but also in crafting the vision for where the company is headed. And we're really in the business of developing partnerships with families from preconception through early childhood to meet their healthcare needs and also to provide services and support to them through that journey. I spend a lot of time working with and providing advice in response to board of directors, to shareholders, building partnerships with companies like Roche Diagnostics, like Amazon, which both represent individual channels that we're selling our products through, very different channels, but important channels. And then, day-to-day strategy and raising of capital for to fuel our operations and our growth. So that's primarily the focus of my role. We're about 105 employees. Again, we have operations in all 50 states. And it's a very competitive industry, but one that we spend a lot of time working and focusing to maintain our competitive edge to lead. I came up through the ranks as an attorney. I started my career as in-house counsel for a public company and migrated from there over to the business side. I was CFO for a time of a public company. I was CEO of a company called Exact Sciences, which was in non-invasive colorectal cancer screening space using DNA, and then have started a couple companies and ended up kind of in my real comfort spot now, which is as CEO, running kind of small to medium-sized corporations.
Well, the science that you guys do is so cutting edge and so important. So very interesting. Lisa, could we turn it over to you?
Sure. Hi, I am also extremely glad to be doing this. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Lisa Geller. I am a patent attorney. I'm the head of intellectual property for Series Therapeutics, which is a microbiome company. We are working on making FDA approved drugs using live bacteria. They are naturally occurring bacteria these days. This is what we do. Very exciting field, very new field where the science is evolving in terms of our knowledge. At the same time, we're evolving these drugs. I started, I was an academic scientist originally. I did the graduate school, postdocs, left graduate school to think about things, went back to graduate school. After a couple of postdocs, I evolved into being an academic scientist as faculty member, and then decided I wanted to do something else, interviewed a lot of people about what they did, and ended up going into patent law and working first in law firms. And in those did not only patent law, but started learning to do some litigation and did quite a bit of licensing work, so expanding outside of just doing science. And then went to a large company where I was a patent attorney with handling a large drug portfolio, and then decided that I like small startups. And in small startups, you not only do the intellectual property, which means patents, trademark, trade secret, know-how, but also managing all kinds of other things ranging from labor issues, corporate issues, sort of learn on the fly, which is also very fun once you start to take a liking to the law. And so right now I primarily do intellectual property, primarily patent portfolios, where my job is to both identify the inventions coming from our scientists and to protect the company from other people who other patents that may or may not cover us, as well as working with strategies with competitors, with collaborators, and managing some of those kinds of relationships.
Thank you, Lisa. Very interesting. Now, we also have on our panel an expert in the policy-related space, and that's Jillian Willett. Jillian, would you like to, can you give us some information about your background?
So yeah, my current position, and I have to say, to reassure everybody, my career is utterly, totally unplanned. So basically, you seize opportunities. So currently, I'm at Avalier Health, which is an advisory services company, and I head up our regulatory strategy and policy practice. So this is dealing with drugs, biologics, devices, and how you can position them, get them approved by FDA with essentially a label that allows for a reimbursement and commercialization strategy that makes it a viable business. So it's early in the process, but it has to anticipate. And we're obviously in a very interesting policy environment. We've just got a commissioner who actually was one of our colleagues here at Avalier. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that political policy environment interacts at the FDA. Now, generally our work governs highly regulated markets. The reimbursement in Avalier is largely US, but for 5% of the world's population, we are 50% of the world's market for biologics and biotech products, which is my own area of specialization. So in the history, I got a classic education back in the UK at the other Cambridge, the old one, and spent about 40 years with monoclonal antibodies, did a couple of postdocs, sort of switched nationalities en route, and actually was at AIBS for a number of years from 87 to 95, dealing with peer review of largely applications for funding to a number of federal agencies. Then I went to Pharma, the trade association, then to Bio as their VP Science and Reg, dealing with that interface of the trade associations, which is a wholly special environment, their members being the major drug companies, for a number of years. And then I did go to a law firm, even though I'm not a lawyer. I was the chief scientist at a boutique food and drug law firm in Washington. Had the interesting experience of suing the FDA and winning, which I gather is not terribly common, but was kind of interesting to go through. And then I joined Avalier because in health policy, ultimately I've learned in the US, everything is about how stuff is paid for. So I've been here about 5 years and I'm still working out how stuff is paid for in the US because it's not an intuitive environment that the most valuable, best scientifically product is actually going to be the one that gets market share. So it's an interesting time. FDA has that binary job that if you're not approved, you are not commercialized. But it's also in the construct of global product development. And we do deal with regulatory approaches for the highly regulated markets, which is basically Europe, US, Japan, but commercialization principally focusing on the US.
So one thing that I hear from the three panelists, which I think is great, is that there's different ways to be involved, to be a scientist, to be involved in the legal or policy spaces. And I think this is just really, it hammers home that the different kinds of opportunities for people who have a biologic, who are interested in biology, have that background, to different options that they can pursue. So just to give you a little bit of information about myself, as I mentioned, I'm a patent attorney. I have a PhD in molecular biology, and then I went to law school to study patent law. And the thing that I love most about my job is that I work with patents in a wide range of different technologies in the life sciences, from gene therapy to modified nucleotides, molecular diagnostics, and compounds that are used as drugs. So I love seeing love seeing and working with these technologies that cover really innovative, cutting edge aspects of the life sciences. And in terms of what I actually do for my job, I do two main things. The first is I analyze and provide opinions about the validity or about these life sciences related patents, and I represent companies who are involved in patent litigation relating to these technologies. And as I mentioned, I work in a law firm, and so I have some questions for the panelists. So so I will also pipe up with experiences that I can share from the law firm perspective. So why don't we turn it over to why don't we move on to the program, the portion of the program where I ask you all questions. So this is to the panelists. As many of you know, the participants of the webinar either have a biology background or are interested in biology. From your perspective, for example, someone who works at a biotechnology company or at a consulting firm, what skills have you found are particularly important for biologists to have? Are there things you wish that scientists had experience with or knowledge of when you're looking at candidates for positions?
So, I mean, I'm happy to jump in and say, you have to accept that different systems have different premises. So for me as a non-lawyer working at a law firm, it was interesting to learn that the law is a legitimate construct, but is fundamentally different. It's driven by precedent, for instance. So I think if you're a scientist and you are looking to transition, you have to accept that there are different systems out there, different ways of working, and they are equally legitimate. It's very easy, and it's particularly toxic in the current world, and let's face it, I work in downtown DC, to come in and think you know the right answer. You don't know the right answer from the perspective of the person that may have the question. So as I said, I was a scientist, I was a lab rat, it was great for a few years, then moved into looking at peer review. What is the basis of how things get funded? It's not always as obvious as you may think. Then to look at trade associations, again, very different philosophy. And then at the law firm, and now how do things get paid for? So I think the willingness to just jump in when you don't know what the hell is going on, engage, listen, learn, it has to be because you're interested in other ways of looking at things. And that flexibility, so I use the expressions, as a scientific matter, that's true. As a regulatory matter, that's not true. As a legal matter, that may be the case. And you have to be looking at things from a perspective, and particularly in advisory services, law firm was the same. You have clients. They have certain inclinations, certain drivers. They have to, for instance, raise money or, deal with the FDA or whatever. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to take the right advice. So the idea that there's more than one right and having that curiosity to jump in but to listen, I think is absolutely crucial.
Well, and Jillian, it sounds like at least from when I was doing my laboratory work, that's actually a quality that you really need to have also as a scientist. You may not know the right answer, that there are going to be different ways of looking at things.
That's to believe there is a right answer. And my point is there isn't necessarily one right answer.
Ryan, I would add sort of on what Jillian said, which is what I tend to tell people who want to make the change from science to law, is that in science you're asking a question, trying to find out the answer. In the law, you frequently know what answer you want, and you're trying to get there. And that really takes quite a shift, as well as the fact that law is a service industry. You give advice, and people may or may not take it, but you're going to show them the choices. So you have to be reasonably articulate, and you have to, just as a very practical matter, if you hate writing, law is probably not the ideal place to be looking. On the other hand, even if you're not a great writer right now, trust me, you can learn.
Yeah, I'll add to those really thoughtful comments. I guess in the business framework, as I'm looking at folks that I hire, I think one thing early on is people confuse activity for accomplishment. And I think if you're coming into a business environment, you need to be pretty thoughtful about what specifically you're doing that actually advances the goals and objectives of the company. as opposed to just effort. And I'm being very blunt about it, but it is true. And I think that the reality at least in the corporate world is there's not a whole lot of credit for really hard work. There's a lot of credit for really good achievement. And I think, and that is driven individually by whatever institution you're in and how they value things. But it's important to understand how an entity values things right out of the gate, and then make sure you're toggling your effort to address it. I think the other thing is being able, again, this is from the business context in the biotech world, ensuring that what you do is looked at through the lens of timeliness and budgets. So on time and on budget is critical, as opposed to brilliant thought and chasing a new discovery, which there's value in that. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have novel discoveries. But you need to have scientists who have a very practical lens and commercial application for how those discoveries are created, when they're created, and not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. That would be my advice to new folks coming in.
Along those lines, are you all aware of any resources available to biologists that are interested in pursuing a career in these fields? And Jillian, why don't we start with you, because I know specifically you'd identified some resources that would be very helpful to these folks.
So certainly, I think there is a real tendency to sort of jump in, get another degree, and we have people who accumulate degrees by the yard, and of course that can get very expensive, take a long time, but you don't necessarily know what it's like to work in the field. So one of the more obvious, conspicuous opportunities, particularly for those with advanced degrees, is something like the AAAS Fellowships, and they have fellowships that are diplomacy, policy, congressional, but they're quite a investment in applying and going through the whole process. So what we did at Avalere was we just created Fda Fellowships based on people with advanced degrees who want to try out policy and see if they actually know what it is, because I think it's very difficult to know what a job entails if you don't actually have a go. And so we, in 6 months, give people a CV block, certain level of exposure as an Avalere Fellow, and it's that opportunity to explore. And there's certain things that we impose, like not more than 8 hours a day, because to the earlier conversation, perfect being the enemy of the good, people tend to jump into stuff if you've been in a lab and just do more and more of it, more and more intensely, and not really think about the context of the why and what are you aspiring to do. And so we have all sorts of people, because it's interesting to have all sorts of people come in and work out what policy is. And it's amazing how many people confuse policy, communications, education. And at some level, I think in general, my advice is to look around, but also just try stuff. Because otherwise, if you don't look up from the bench, you never see anything beyond the bench. And it's very easy, I think, in academia to get that message that somehow, this is the only pure way to do science, and that applied science is somehow giving up on your heritage. And I think policy does mean different things, but right now health is right in the middle of an awful lot of attention. The opportunities are there, but if you jump in, it goes back to you have to be willing to learn. You have to know that when you do that initial start, there's certain skills that you're going to have to establish. And I think that's where not doing a formal degree, not being good at exams, but finding a way to engage either through volunteering or like we have our fellowship, or there's other internships. That's the way you work out what it really takes.
And we will post, Jillian had mentioned, the internship that Jillian described. AIBS will post information about that resource on the website after the webinar. It sounds like a great thing. Lisa, Jeff, anything to add?
I will offer what I tend to do and how I got pretty much every job I've ever had, which is go to coffee. When I first thought I wanted to leave academic science, I didn't know what there was to do. So I called up everyone I knew who had a background in science, but was no longer being an academic scientist. And I took them to coffee and I just interviewed them about what they did, what it was like, what the career path was like. I had a small child at the time. I wanted to know if it was possible to have a child and still do that kind of work, which at the time at least could be, sometimes the answer was not really. And I just by interviewing people, sometimes people start offering you jobs, which is actually how I got my first job in a law firm. I didn't ask for a job, they offered me one. But I've continued to do that, and I would say that every single job I've had, I didn't actually apply for the job outright. I just went to coffee with people, and they ask you if you're interested in a job. But it's a great way to learn what else is out there, what other people are doing, and you learn that their paths are extremely different, and there is no one way to go. So I would suggest exploring.
Well, I think the fact that the participants of the webinar are just even taking this step of listening to this is really indicates that they are exploring. And I think your message is keep doing that. And thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, I think Lisa makes a very good point, and that is, you definitely need to be thoughtful about how you go about whatever aspiration you have, and there is something compelling about not having an ask when you are exploring opportunities, and whether anyone worth their salt likes to be asked questions and likes to be asked for advice, and so it's actually flattering to the recipient to be asked those kinds of things. And if there is something available, and if your questions are good, you're way more likely to have an offer coming your way than going the same route as everybody else. I guess that's what I would echo with what Lisa said. The other thing I would say is, everyone's journey is different, and so I think there really is no one-size-fits-all trade group or networking group for everybody. I think there's a networking group and trade group for everything right now. The key obviously is relationships, it's good questions, and it's listening. But depending on whether you're interested in biotech or whether you're interested in law and policy or intellectual property, a 30-second web search will find you the best and brightest right near you. But I think it's more about how you consider your approach and how you stand out by doing things that necessarily others won't do. Most companies, including Good Start, hire interns for all kinds of things. Doesn't mean there's always an opening, but every CEO will listen, and it just depends how you make your pitch.
I have some more questions for the panelists, but I wanted to just convey to the participants of the webinar that that this is now the time where you can start inputting questions and sending them to Diane at AIBS, and she'll be compiling those so that when we turn to the next section of our webinar, we'll be ready to roll with your guys' questions. So back to the panelists. Looking over the course of your career, is there something specific that you did that you found to be very helpful in advancing to where you are today? That you look back and you said, "I'm so glad I did that." Is there something that you could share along those lines?
I would say quite simply, I came to the US. I think there's tremendous opportunities here. Did I know what I was coming to? No, I didn't have a clue. Was I terrified? Absolutely. But you do it. You jump and you take on something, not because you have the answers, but because you're curious. And I think to the earlier discussion, you're going forward with a hell of a lot of education if you've done your PhD. You just don't know how to apply it, but you can offer that curiosity. You can do your homework. So you're not wasting people's time when you go for coffee. You're using your network. And I have to say, I was at, when I was at Pharma, the trade association for the originator biopharmaceutical industry, when I was there in the mid-90s, everybody was with their company for like 30 years. You didn't jump around. So the one thing, and then I went to Bio with 1,100 members, the biotechnology industry organization, and there's a lot of startups, and some of them live and some of them die. And so the one network I use, the one social network is LinkedIn, because people are jumping around all over the place. It's not just entry-level people, it's very senior people move a lot more than they did. And being able to develop networks, keep in touch with people because you're genuinely interested in what they're doing, does foster what Lisa said of having that sort of both support network and advisory network out there, and you reciprocate. You help them too, and you share what you've learned. So it's not going to ask people, it's trying to sort of clarify what you've got to offer and what you're interested in and what is really going to make you, you know, basically get up in the morning. And so I said with monoclonals, you know, that's late 70s. All of the things we dreamed of in the early 80s are now coming true. And we've got, you know, a good few hundred monoclonals in development. But what it takes to get a product available is very, very tough. You're talking, you know, 10 to 15 years to get through the FDA. So you're going to have a certain stamina. You're going to have a certain persistence. And you just accept that and you keep going. I think the real problem is when people give up because they think they can't do something because it's not been something they've thought about before.
Well, I know from my own experience that the thing that I've done that's been the most valuable is always doing what I really like to do, in terms of what am I interested in, and what is the job that fills that interest. And it's like Jillian was saying, it can be a lot of hard work, but if you really love it, then that doesn't seem like work anymore. You're doing what you like to do. And so that's sort of been my guide. That's for me, that's really been my guiding principle of how I've developed in my career. Lisa, Jeff, anything else to add?
Well, you had asked what was the sort of one of the most important things, and it was reaching escape velocity from academic science. It's been alluded to that everything was training to stay in academic science, and I didn't know it was beyond that. And it was kind of close your eyes and jump to leave it. It turns out it was great to have done that. Career is incredibly fun. I will say for patent law, I get to tell people what experiments I want them to do, and I don't have to do the experiment anymore, nor do I have to raise the money. It's really quite entertaining. And the other thing that I learned to do, I actually do this much more often, but I do try to make sure roughly every 3 years, and at least every 3 years, I sort of check in and say, is this company still fun? And if it's not, I start going to coffee more often, see what turns out. So.
Yeah, I would just add one caveat though on the do what's fun is sometimes you just have to slog through certain things. So I have a 20% rule that says 20% of my job I would do even if I wasn't paid. Anybody can put up with 80% tedium or 80% slog or 80% anything. So yes, you're looking for what you really believe in. You're looking to change the world, or at least you should be. But you accept that there is work to be done to get there, and it may take a certain length of time, but you look outside the walls of your immediate vicinity because the people there are telling you to validate what they've done, that you should do what they've done. And I think you have to be prepared to take that bit of a risk. And I can tell you a one-way ticket to the United States is that risk. But did it turn out okay? ultimately, yes. Do I know where I'll end up? No, but I'm certainly not going back to the UK. So I think you take risks, but you also plan. I always had the money for a return ticket in the bank. You manage those risks that you're taking, and you make those explicit choices. So you don't jump blind. You don't jump without doing your homework, but you still take the risk. And if you don't take the risks, you're not going to end up in the super interesting places, but you may be a lot safer and you may be a lot more comfortable. So recognize your own personality as you do it, and recognizing you're going to have failures, and failures are okay. That means they're not in the UK, they're great here. It means you've tried to do something and maybe it wasn't that great an idea, but then you manage your way out. So I was at a law firm for 8 years, and I knew ultimately I was not a lawyer. And if you're not a lawyer at a law firm, you're not a lawyer. So I managed my way out, having realized that, and took 2 years to work out where am I going to go next. And I did the work and everything that could have been expected, so that I would then have the choice on my terms. So it's not easy, it is risky, it is scary, but there is so much out there if you could basically add up. Even in the current environment we find ourselves in the US, where we're trying to be fact independent, there are still opportunities for those long-term development plans, the things that you have to just build the bedrock of, say, a regulatory dossier, or, you know, policy always sounds more attractive, because I think, you know, there's this whole idea that you're doing more, but actually the bedrock of understanding how things are made available to patients, the procedures that have to be gone through, those things are never bad to have on your resume.
So Diane, I have a couple more questions, but I wanted just to check if you're getting input from the participants, because we want to make sure that I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time for them. So can I ask another question, or should I turn it over, start thinking about turning it over to you?
We have about 4 or 5 questions right now, so.
Okay, great. So let's continue with some, we'll finish up my questions, and we can turn to their participants' input. So, and I think one of the questions that maybe during these coffees that people will ask is, why did you choose a career in the legal or policy space? Why not stay in the traditional path of, you know, working in a lab, or what made you change? What made you go from the traditional to where you are now?
I would say I didn't choose a career, I chose an opportunity in front of me. And you choose a series of opportunities. And I think the one criteria I applied was, in addition to what do I have to offer, is what can I learn? So I wanted to know how things worked. And that's where at Avalier, I'm still trying to work out how the US healthcare system works and how things get paid for. And I think, you know, that can take you the rest of your life, or you can just give up and say the incentives are so counterintuitive, I want to do something else. But I don't think for most people, unless you stay in academia, you really know that, you know, where you're going to end up. What you're doing is taking interesting steps that collectively give you more choices for the next step. And I think it's that seizing of an opportunity, making sure you're learning something new, that you're testing yourself at some level. Do I like this? Do I want to do, you know, press? Do I want to do interface directly with the FDA? Do I want to be writing briefs or policy papers or whatever? You're testing your own personality in the context of the opportunities in front of you. And I think it's, you go off at tangents all over the place. And then you do the revisiting that was discussed earlier and say, is this where I meant to end up? Am I on the right path? And nothing is forever.
Well, Lisa, you had mentioned that you made that choice to leave academic research. What motivated that?
I've been doing research in labs. Started working as a technician in a lab when I was 17, and I was just tired of being at the bench, and also because there wasn't actually all that much variety in what I was doing. The research is slow, and you're on one topic, and I maybe have scientific ADD or something. And when I first went to work for a law firm, part of the attraction was, as you said, you're working on lots of different kinds of technologies. And I've even done mechanical engineering, although why anyone had to do that is another question. But I've worked in many different fields. But what's evolved as I've started to work in companies is it's working with the cutting edge science, but the business strategy, the difficulties and the challenges of working with multiple entities, putting together a program, working with teams to really get drugs that are genuinely beneficial out to patient populations, I find extremely motivating. And at the personal level, I kind of like, this is going to sound bad, I kind of like the stress, as long as it's not all the time, of working in these kinds of settings. I'm usually in startups, only attorney, not just the only patent attorney, and then I almost always the only patent attorney. It's a lot of responsibility. I actually happen to like that, but I had to learn that I liked that.
It's exciting.
It's very engaging. It's very intellectually interesting and quite satisfying because you see things come together, although as Jillian says, you may have to wait for a while to actually see that happen. So.
Jeff, do you have any perspective from the business side of how you got into that that piece of the biotech industry?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd like to say that there's some grand plan, but there really isn't. I mean, these things are always nonlinear, and I think you do the best you can to follow your instincts and to follow your what you really enjoy. But like most things, it's serendipity. I started out as a lawyer, but I gravitated toward the business because I enjoyed it more, and I think it played to my instincts and my creativity and thought processes. I was better on the business side, frankly, than I think I was on the legal side. And so you just need to kind of constantly take stock of where you are and reassess and get a feel for, am I doing what I really want to do, or is there an adjustment I can make? But you can't plan out every step. I couldn't have told you 20 years ago that I would be CEO of a biotech company. I started out in healthcare generally and managed care much differently. And it's really just not a linear exercise. It's constant adjustments and it's constant reassessment, and you got to just feel your way as best you can. I wish there was a better answer than that, but that's the truth.
But I think you're making a key point: is you're never there. You're just reevaluating, and it has to be ongoing. And quite frankly, if something turns out to be horrible, admit it. Look around and change it. I think the real mistake is when people think, well, this is what I decided to do, therefore they're making it linear and following a path because it was expected. I think that's the real mistake. And when people get trapped is they convince themselves they can't do anything else. And I think what we're all encouraging is there's a whole load of choices out there. The skills you've got are useful. I'm still using the science every day, even if I'm aware when I'm being scientific or whether I'm being economic or whether I'm being regulatory, is you have to, at some level, decide your career is yours and you've got choices ahead and there's ways to get to what you think might be what you want to do, but reevaluating regularly. I mean, Lisa said every 3 years, that's probably wise. I tend to stick in the same place for about 7. And then I said, my spouse is doing well. He doesn't get the 7-year itch. But it's recognizing you're somewhere you don't want to be, and it's entirely within your control to change it into something else.
And I think that's a great message for a webinar where people are interested in looking at different career paths of what is out there that I will enjoy. So Diane, on that note, can I turn it over to you so we can give input on the questions that the participants have been sending you.
Absolutely. Okay. So starting off, we have a Margarita. She asked, I'm a graduate student with 2 more years to go on my PhD, and my expertise is in developmental biology and genetics, but I would love to transition into policy. What advice would you give someone like me in order to build skills and a CV that would be useful for this career path?
Jillian, do you want to
I
take that?
think that, I mean, if you've got 2 years to go, look at AAAS at their fellowships. They've got very structured programs. They're highly competitive, but compete. So I
And
think
what is AAAS? Could you describe what that
the
is?
American Association for the Advancement of Science has a whole series of fellowships. It's a very big program, but it's got a long lead time. So by your saying you have 2 years, go on the website of AAAS.org, look at their fellows program. There's congressional fellows, there's diplomacy fellows with the State Department, there's policy fellows with NIH, and give it a go. Because if nothing else, the process of looking through what you want to do and what they're asking for, and I used to chair the policy fellows program, so we saw all sorts. They have fresh graduates, they have people who are 65 years old join that program. But that would be a starting way, even if you ultimately decide that's not what you want. It may help discipline your thinking as to what policy is and what they're looking for, and maybe you'd want to go on the Hill instead. Interesting place, slightly crazy, but for a couple of years, never a bad place to be. And then they work with a whole variety of agencies as well. So again, they can be useful CV blocks if it's the National Academy of Sciences or whomever, or USAID, Agency for International Development. So that's a good place just to structure your thinking a bit more.
Ryan, can I just say one thing, which is that no matter what your degree is in, that if you have a science degree, in particular a research-based degree, so a master's or a PhD, what you really have been doing is learning how to ask a question and find the answer. It's not, you shouldn't consider yourself limited to the field that you originally worked in, that it's training for how to do things. So I just wanted people to hear that.
The sciences, and particularly the PhD degree, really trains you how to think.
And there's another thing I would throw in. The PhD is the only global degree. So don't necessarily restrict yourself to the US either. I mean, I came here and okay, I had to certify my Oxbridge degrees as up to US standards for immigration purposes, but academically, they are accepted worldwide. So if you're at the stage of just graduating, this is the time to explore. This is the time to jump around, do a couple of years in things, get some understanding of what it is that makes you tick. And at the beginning of your career, you should be jumping around. That was the original model of a postdoc. So take the most of that opportunity when you're comparatively less encumbered.
All really great points. Diane, do you want to move on to the next question?
Absolutely. All right, let's see. So this is from Young Lee. I have a question for Jillian. You said you're a non-lawyer working in a law firm. I'm curious how your expertise in life science fit into legal work. How does your daily work life look like?
So a law firm is a law firm is a law firm. So yes, you are on billable hours. Yes, you are on, in my case, 15-minute increments. So am I at the consulting, the advisory services firm. We were food and drug law. And part of the litigation in some cases, or the regulatory strategy and dossiers and filings for FDA we were involved in, are integral on the science. FDA is a science-based agency. The science is necessary but not sufficient. So it was translating what a statute says into, okay, how can we use regulatory precedents? What other products are so-called similarly situated that we can apply to the given conundrum of the given client that we were facing then? So it's puzzles, and it was integrating the regulatory science of data and evidence with the legal approach of, can we find some precedents? Because FDA is always more sympathetic if you can show them they've already made the decision before. So it was a lot of fun. And I have to say, for a few years, it was great. But ultimately, at a law firm, if you're not a lawyer, you are a second-class citizen, and just be realistic about it. You can go there and learn, but you're never really in DC. You can actually be a partner without having a law degree, but basically there's an inherent limitation if you're in a profession that has certain expectations in order to enter. So to me, it was absolutely fantastic experience. It was a brilliant partner. I learned so much, but it wasn't going to be the rest of my life.
From the law firm perspective, the firm that I work at, as well as it's a common program at many firms, is what's called a patent agent program. And that's a program where a student or a person who has a technical degree but not a law degree can take a test, and we can put the link to more information on this on the website, on the AIBS website. And then you can practice, or not practice, but you can work with, as a patent agent, you can work with a patent attorney to in the process of preparing patents and ultimately obtaining patents. And that people have found that is a good way to get in there and try what patent law is, find out what patent law is like and how law firm works, without having to have a law degree. It's common that the patent agents will if they like it, they'll go back to law school, but that's a way to sort of test the waters in terms of patent law at a law firm without having to make the investment in the time of going to law school. So that's another alternative that's quite popular in the IP field. Diane, I know we have some more questions, so can we? I want to make sure we get through them.
Sure. So, did any of you feel that law was just as intense in terms of hours spent as biology?
Oh, it's much more intense, I think. Ryan, do you want to say something about that? It's you're working on, so Ryan had mentioned before that when you're working in a law firm, you're on what's called billable goal. And actually, Jillian mentioned this at all. You're either 15-minute or 6-minute increments. Every bit of time is accounted for, and you have a number of hours that you must work per year as a minimum. That's a little bit variable between firms, but that is, law firms are businesses, and they need you to make money.
Yeah, I was at a boutique food and drug law firm, and I think it was slightly different, but you're right. You will never see time the same way again.
No.
That you are on timesheets, you are accounting for your time, and it can be quite a bit of pressure, and it's very, very different from a lab where you just work longer. So I think Jeff brought this up earlier on, this whole idea of, the perfect being the enemy of the good, and timelines, budgets. So at some point, the question is not that my science is really, really neat. It is a very much, what is the dollar value of my science? How does it translate? How can I get people to invest in it? And I think there's an awful lot of great science out there. Most of it will stay great science and not do anything in terms of turning into a product. So being pretty candid about, value and economics and, putting oneself in a little bit of perspective, I think, is a very important part of trying to put your toe into another different pond, because the things you've done before will be differently perceived. And we definitely have that with some of the fellows that join us here. It's like, I'm giving you 2 hours to look at this and give me an answer. There's a good enough answer that says you don't delve in for the next week and give me 50 pages to read. So I think that mindset of learning how different systems work is critically, critically important.
Great.
One thing which is quickly is that now that I'm in-house counsel, primarily I call other people and say, I need this, quickly. and they have to produce. I'm not on a billable goal. On the other hand, I am to some extent at the beck and call of my leadership team. And like I said before, law is a service industry. If people need you to do something, the answer is yes, I will do it.
And I'll do it in an hour.
Absolutely.
My take on it is it's just as intense as biology. It's really, really exciting. So if you live on that, if you live on that intensity, it's great. And as Lisa said, it's really exciting. But it's not something that you can realistically. It's not something you can say it's an easier path.
All right,
Diane?
we have about 3 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we'll probably have to end this. And I'll go ahead and forward some of the questions, any of the remaining ones, to the panelists and see if we can get some answers back, and maybe submit those with email when we send out the links.
Absolutely.
Here's the last question. Are there any common qualities, characteristics in scientists who transition into law but later decide they do not like practicing patent law?
I would just put a quick comment in that there's an awful lot more law that involves science than patent law. So just all due respect to the patent attorneys, but I was doing regulatory policy and strategy, food and drug law, very, very different. So there are a lot of choices.
Yeah, and I do some regulatory and some health law, besides labor law.
Well, and I think that goes to the point of, to me, it seems like if you're interested in the law and you have the science background, you can try patents, you can try regulatory. There's so many different options, like Jillian was saying, within the legal space for biologists, that it's not, there may be characteristics of people that don't like patent law, but then they find that they like regulatory. So it's really just keeping your options open within law if you have that science background. So Diane, I think we're really close on time. We're happy to take additional questions by email, and we can address those offline, and then put the answers or responses on the website. Did you or Rob have any? I would like to personally thank all the panelists for taking the time today, because I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone of the participants have as well. I think this has been a really amazing conversation that we got going. Rob, any further comments or concluding remarks before we break?
Again, I'd like to echo your comments, and that we appreciate everyone's time and interest. This was a valuable program. I know I also learned a bit, and which is always part of the excitement, right? As we're all learning something. And I think that was the common thread that everyone shared. So we plan to have more of these programs. We will also have this program recorded, and we'll post it online within a few days. So there'll be additional information, and for some individuals who were unable to participate. But again, I thank the panelists and everyone who participated. So
I have one little thing to add. Sorry to interrupt you, Rob. I just, again, would like to thank everybody. And I'd also like to thank Burke and Associates for sponsoring this webinar. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Rhiannon Muir for moderating and planning this entire webinar. We really appreciate it. And I also like to thank, obviously, the panelists and all of our individual and organizational members for their support. If you're not a member of AIBS, please feel free to visit our website at aibs.org and join. So help us bring biology to life. And again, feel free to visit our website to see recordings of even past webinars in this series. So I think that's about it. I'd like to thank everybody again. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you for having us.